No, not one of the great little trains of Wales, but the enchanting Downs Light Railway at the Downs School at Colwall near Malvern. The first railway my own son had a chance of helping to run when he was a pupil at the school. The boys actually drive the engine and manage the line. But believe it or not, it has a connection with Wales, for Mr. James Boyd, who now flags his pupils to stop, is none other than the present chairman of the famous Talyllyn Railway. Had a nice trip, chaps?
Yes, sir.
Dining car on today? No, getting a bit peckish. John, we're going to do a little shunting movement now. And so are we, from Colwall to Talyllyn. Perhaps some of those keen youngsters from the Downs School will be joining the band of enthusiasts who have helped to keep the Talyllyn running since 1950, the first railway preservation society to be formed in the world. And here is where it is. It runs inland from the sea coast of the old county of Meirionydd in North Wales into the heart of the wild mountains south of Cadair Idris. 7 miles of steam-propelled delight. The starting point is Twywn, with its promenade fronting the sands and behind the solid line of the hotels and boarding houses, all set to make the little resort's fortune on bed and breakfasts in late Victorian days. And Old Twywn, a little more staid after the giddy charms of the seafront, with the church, the assembly rooms, and the Corbett Arms, for the Corbetts were once a power in the land hereabouts. And between Old and New Twywn, the railway terminus of the wharf station. Here's what it looked like in the historic year 1950, when it seemed that the little line was going to close forever with the death of the last owner, Sir Henry Hayden-Jones, the MP for Meirionydd. And here are the enthusiasts who came to the rescue. They set to work, unpaid, repairing the track, renovating the engines, and today, Wharf Station is the worthy starting point for your trip up the line, with the added attraction of the Railway Museum, which you can inspect while you wait for your train. It was given its formal opening by the mayor, for Twywn was delighted to welcome back the little line. It's part of the life of the place. If you're captured by the delights of steam, and who isn't, every little detail about it has romance. And here in the museum are the old engine nameplates, station oil lamps, coats of arms of long-vanished lines, ancient ticket machines, those notice boards in Welsh, rhybydd, that graced the little lines of Wales with sinister warnings against trespassing. Well, they're all here. And charming old engines like Dot. This delightful brass-polished veteran doesn't actually come from Wales. She ran in the works, where she was built by Bayer Peacock, the famous locomotive manufacturers at Gorton, Manchester. But she's been made welcome in this comfortable home for the hard-working, retired old ladies of the engine world. Here is one of the original slate wagons that brought the slates down from the Bryn Eglwys quarry behind Twywn, and attached to it the aptly named Rough Pup, with a firebox open to the weather. Rough Pup ran on the narrow ledges in the great Dinorwig quarry at Llanberis, and she was built tough to stand up to rock falls. You can still see the dents they made on her sides. In 1965, 100 years after the original company was formed, that distinguished friend of steam, Sir John Betchman, opened a gloriously renovated wharf station. And now we're off. The magical sound of steam as the little engine Dolgoch puts its heart into the task of getting the train up the steep incline out of Wharf Station. You feel like leaning out and patting Dolgoch on its gleaming smokestack and saying, "Well done, boy," as it comes into Pendray's station. Here are the company's workshops. Here they overhaul or service the 6 steam engines that form the original stable. They are of all ages and places of origin. Some go back to the early days, 1865. Some have come from defunct lines in Wales. Others, like this one, Douglas, began life in 1918, building aerodromes for the Air Service Construction Corps. The volunteers went into Pendray in 1950 and resurrected the whole motive power of the line. The train leaves Pendray station and begins to enter the lovely countryside. Pendray, after all, means in Welsh the top or the edge of the town, and the country starts straight away. Now the hills start to appear over the low flats of the valley of the Vathew. The line has still a few miles to go before it really gets to grip with the steep climb ahead of it. Here it's hardly more than 50 feet above sea level. And straight ahead is a bridge across the line that the drivers treat with respect. The hole, as they call it, is smaller than usual, and the line had to be lowered to let number 6 engine pass safely underneath it. This is one of the few straight bits of the line. The little trains of Wales, like the old Celtic craftsmen of the Bronze Age, seem to thrive on twists and curves. But driver Di Jones and fireman Mike Green see us safely around the bend into the Rhydyr station. Rhyd is a ford in Welsh. Onnen is the ash tree. So we've reached Ashford. This is the place where the serious country walkers get out, the men and women who are not afraid of a 10-mile hike. For a mile to the north, and running parallel with the Vathew Valley used by the train, is one of the most spectacular valleys in the whole of North Wales, the valley of the Talyllyn River. The first sensation is Talyllyn, Bird Rock, a savage crag that leaps suddenly out of the flat lands. And it gets its name for a curious reason. You would expect birds of all sorts to breed on a crag like this, buzzards or hawks or rooks, ravens. But the birds of Bird Rock are a total surprise. They are black cormorants, and it's very rare indeed to find these seabirds breeding so far inland. But here in the season, you'll find them standing around their nests like deacons discussing the sermon after chapel. Talyllyn also has an old Iron Age fort among the summit rocks. And there is the sea in the distance, at least 5 miles away. The valley floor of the Talyllyn is amazingly flat. It's been U-shaped by the glaciers that flowed down during the long ice ages from the high ground of Cadaridris. These are the foothills, that run back for miles, holding hidden side valleys. And here is the peak itself, the rocky chair, so the legends say, of the giant Idris, rising towards the 3,000-foot mark. No wonder that this was the place where the Welsh made their last stand in the wars of Edward I. When the stern English king overthrew Talyllyn the Last, Llywelyn's brother David assumed the title of Prince of Wales, but was compelled to fly here to the fortress of Talyllyn. Yet the long arm of Edward penetrated even to this lonely fastness, and David was eventually betrayed into his hands. Talyllyn has thus always seemed to me rather a sad, tragic place. But how beautiful is the whole wild country that surrounds it. Right at the head of this hidden valley is the church of Talyllyn. These little country churches of Wales. They have a charm all of their own. They were never very opulent. They can't compete, for that matter, with even an average church in any village in southern Britain. There was never enough money in remote rural Wales to build the noble structures that grace the Cotswolds or parts of Norfolk. Before the Bryn Eglwys quarry began around 1847, and then, later on, the railway came to take the slates down to the sea, there was no source of outside income beyond the vast herds of black cattle driven to market in distant England. So the little church of St. Michael in the Vale of Pennant, with its rustic sundial and its modest inscription over the door to walk humbly in the house of the Lord, remains as unpretentious, yet as friendly and charming as our own little train. That train has now become part of the life of the countryside. In the old pre-motor car days, everyone in the valley depended on it. It wasn't just of value to the slate quarries. The guard would undertake to buy things in town for the farms en route. And as one old patron of the line told me in confidence, the contents of some of the outside loos in Aberganolwyn village were brought down on the train and quietly tipped on certain fields. You can always tell where, even today, he declared. Look for the fields that are greenest. The handover of the staff. It clears the train safely into the next section of the line. The line is climbing slowly but steadily. It starts almost at sea level, and by the time it reaches the terminus, the total length is 7¼ miles, which is a good practical length to operate. There is sometimes danger in planning to restore a little railway like this. The planners might be carried away by their dreams. But the costs of operating a railway line are continually increasing, and enthusiasts have to become hard-headed realists. The Talyllyn Railway, first in the field, is a model of how these things should be run. The Dolgoch Gorge, alive with the cool sound of water cascading down from the high hills, through the fresh green woods, down to the Dolgoch, the red meadow far below. This is not only the scenic showplace of the line, it was the greatest challenge to the builders. They had to face the problem of getting their line over this deep cleft in the mountainside. They solved it with this splendid viaduct, the boldest and highest bridge on the railway. Over the bridge, the train enters Dolgoch station. At Dolgoch, the station is nearly 200 feet above sea level, and you really feel that you are well into the mountains. This is sheep country, and the sheep and the Talyllyn are old friends. Well, you just can't keep these four-legged mountaineers off the line. They don't worry about fences or high walls. As one farmer said about Welsh sheep, they're not really sheep, boy. They're antelopes in woolly pullovers. The Talyllyn drivers are patient, well-trained in emergency sheep drill. And the company is continually looking after the fences. There are 14 miles of hedges to keep in order. And the Talyllyn has 2 men on continual duty, keeping them in trim. Dolgoch is also the point where the engine takes on water. It needs it, for we have now come 5 miles from Twywn, up an ever-increasing gradient, and it'll be uphill all the way from here on. As the little train puffs and pants its way upwards from Dolgoch, through the mountain oaks that are part of the original forest that once covered the lower slopes of all the mountains of Wales. I wonder what the original promoters of the line would say if they could see it now. Would they ever have believed that it would still be going strong, in fact be busier than ever before, after well over 100 years of service? And Dolgoch, the engine that pulls our train, was actually built for the opening of the line by Fletcher Jennings of Whitehaven and delivered in 1866. There can't be many such veterans still going strong. It was one of the 2 engines that began business in December of that year. The rolling stock was a handful of passenger coaches, for the Talyllyn always catered for the needs of the people of the valley, and 200 slate wagons. These were the real heart of the business, for the line had been built to serve the quarry of Bryn Eglwys high up in the mountains behind Twywn. Before the line came, the slates were brought down through this countryside on long strings of pack horses to the little port of Aberganolwyn. In the mid-1860s, the original owners of the quarry sold it to a group of Manchester businessmen. Slate was booming with the hectic growth of the big industrial towns of the north, and maybe the canny Mancunians were also influenced by the idea that there was also a vein of gold amongst the slates. I wonder what equally canny local sold them that idea. The little line was never exactly a gold mine. For that matter, the quarry it served also just about ticked over. It only made money, apparently, when the bigger quarries in North Wales went on strike. So the line panted along, getting dangerously near the red as the slate industry declined. And it was only kept going in the end by the beginning of the tourist industry. 6,000 passengers were carried in 1949. Then the enthusiasts took over. And by the mid-70s, the train was carrying nearly 200,000 people a year. One of the greatest of the great little trains of Wales was back in high favour. Here you get a good idea of the gauge. It's 2 feet 3 inches, in the same range as its fellow lines at Festiniog and Welshpool. And Talyllyn's been lucky in one respect. There was no need to build tunnels, but there were cuttings through the solid rock. The enthusiasts who restored the line first in 1950, of course, remember one of them vividly. It had such a tendency to flood in the winter that they christened it Tadpole Cutting. The doors on the carriages are all on the left, for there are no platforms on the right sides of the stations. A sign that the line, for most of its course, had to be carved out of the mountainside. We're coming close to Aberganolwyn. The speed is limited by the Act of Parliament that authorised the line to a maximum of 15 miles per hour. Needless to say, Dolgoch didn't haul our train on this up journey at that speed, but she's done pretty well as she pulls up at Aberganolwyn station. And all the way up, I couldn't help thinking of the volunteers who've restored this fascinating line and who for over a quarter of a century have helped to keep it going. At Aberganolwyn station, I got out and put the question to 3 of them, a quantity surveyor, a telecommunications expert, and a psychiatrist. Why do you do it?
Well, I'm a quantity surveyor. I've been coming up here for 10 years now, helping mainly on the traffic side. I like the country around here. I like the railway. I wouldn't like to see this railway die after all the time that it's been running. and I want as many other people to enjoy the railway as much as I do.
I think it's a very good excuse for most of us to in fact, operate trains. It's a necessary evil that we have to carry people.
I have a feeling that there's, you could liken perhaps some steam engines to people, really. I think this has been said before, and this is nothing original from me by any means, but I have a feeling that, well, you know, steam engines breathe, they eat, and they excrete as well. So perhaps that's the fascination. Certainly they're all very individual, and that's certainly the fascination for me of the steam engine itself.
Happy men, doing something that gives them deep satisfaction. Men enchanted by steam. The station at Aberganolwyn isn't in the village. It's up on the hillside above, 380 feet above sea level. And a great wheel is still there, just off the station platform. In the old days, this was used to work an incline, down which they dropped the little trucks carrying goods for the village. Aberganolwyn is far below in a deep valley, and the cottages were built for the men who worked in the Bryn quarry. They maintained that the casks of beer being lowered down the incline had a totally unaccountable habit of slipping and cracking as they came down on their way to the pub at the bottom. The inn could only have one name, the railway. It's still there, proud of its connection with Talyllyn Bach, as they call the railway affectionately in Welsh, the Little Line. This was also the quarryman's inn, as well as the railwayman's in the old days. Old retired quarrymen like Lewis Roberts and David Owen Jones still sit on the bench outside it, remembering the days when everyone in Aberganolwyn worked or depended on the quarry. It was 600 feet above the village, and they had to walk up and down every day to the job. They all went to work at an incredibly early age. There was nothing else to do. And in the mass photographs that were traditional in all the Welsh quarries at the turn of the century, it's always rather touching to see the rows of youngsters set out in front. There was an even bigger incline at the quarry itself, and the huge drums of the winding gear sent the slates down to the line 100 feet below, where the slate wagons were hitched onto the trains to start their journey down to Twywn. Until recently, no passengers came to the actual end of the railway. The section was simply of use to the quarry, but the Talyllyn always had ambitions to open up the whole line to their paying passengers. After a long spell of hard work, restoring the line, enlarging the cuttings, making new embankments, the volunteers have created a new terminus. And today, the Talyllyn ends in triumph at the Nant-Gwrnol terminus, 7¼ miles from Twywn, and opened in May 1976. And just a mile beyond, deep set in the hills, is the lake at Talyllyn. Tal in Welsh is the top or head of the lake. A temptation for painters, a delight for tourists, and the very place from which the little railway takes its name. But the intriguing part about it is that the railway does not reach Talyllyn and was never planned to reach it. It's a mystery how the little line ever got called the Talyllyn, and not, after all, by the correct, if rather prosaic, title of the Twywn and the Aberganolwyn Railway. Well, the fishermen could tell you, and the mountain walkers, and everybody who has come up the little railway and then set off from the terminus to enjoy some of the most romantic scenery in Wales. The lake and the great hills that hold it may not be the actual end of the line, but their charm, their beauty, to a lover of steam, are the same as that of our railway. The lake and the line are worthy companions. And after our journey along the track from Twywn, then on to the lake, who can doubt that Talyllyn Bach has every right to enjoy the musical and evocative title of the Talyllyn?